Most of us, perhaps all of us, have wondered about and even wrestled with questions about life. For example, origins. Where did we come from? Or meaning. Does life have a purpose, or do we live a meaningless life and die? Another is morality. Why should we live any particular way at all? Is there an objective morality, or do we make it up as we go? Destiny is another one. What happens after we die? Do we cease to exist when we breathe our last, or do we continue existing in some form, and if so, do we go somewhere? There are many religions and belief systems. What are the areas of agreement and disagreement? Welcome to our merry band at the Fellowship of the Book, as we ponder the big question.
As we ponder the big question. And we have my rent-a friend, Bill Honsberger, is going to be leading our merry band. Ikar, you can turn it the other way. We can't. We're looking at you sideways.
If you have the phone,
there you go. Yeah.
Welcome.
Welcome. Okay, Bill, carry on smartly.
Smartly. All right. So, some interesting opening words. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Praise be to Allah, the cherisher and sustainer of the worlds. Most gracious, most merciful, master of the day of judgment. Excuse me. Let me get my fingers to work. Thee do we worship, and thine aid we seek. Show us the straight way, the way of those on whom thou hast bestowed thy grace, those whose portion is not wrath, and who go not astray. And this is the opening verses from the first chapter, the first surah of the Quran itself. Quran means recitation. And so according to the official version of the story that you see even in different versions of Islam, Mohammed heard these words in a cave that he had been praying at for a number of months or years. And he heard these words, and he was originally convinced, I'm going to give you the official version, but even some of their sources will talk about this, that he was paralyzed by he thought an evil jinn, an evil spirit, a Jinn, a jinn, had attacked him and was trying to possess him. And so he fell on the ground, was foaming at the mouth, doing what sounds like a grand mal seizure. And at this point, he went home. He talked to his wife, who, along with some others, convinced him that this was not, in fact, an evil jinn, but this is, in fact, Gabriel from the Bible, in English, who had given these words, and he needs to go back and listen to this recitation. And according to this idea, is that there is a heavenly Quran, and Gabriel was reading it to Muhammad, who was ordered to memorize it and have his followers memorize it as well. And so that's the opening lines of the story. And with it, millions of people are going to die over the next 1,400 years. Many kafir, non-Muslims, many Muslims are killed by other Muslims. You can't understand the Sunni and Shia. They can't understand why Saudi Arabia is so threatened by Iran and stuff like this without understanding a very long fight, a very old fight. So what I want to try to do with this, the presentation I often give in my world religions class, I don't claim to be an expert, or certainly not the expert on Islam. I know a lot about a lot of different world religions, but I'm learning all the time. I've literally been learning all my life about these different religions. I learned something about Islam 5 years ago that was major to me. It was so similar to something that the Buddhists have taught for years. And I'm like, Muslims don't believe this. Well, it turns out they did. We'll get to that particular point later. But something amongst the Arab scholars that are, that you'll hear it like the university in Cairo. You won't necessarily hear it at your local mosque down the street or something like this, or hear Muslims talking at that, coffee shop about it. But it is what some of the scholars teach. And so to do this, I want to give you some quick breakdowns. Don, is this a format where we take questions in the sessions or not?
Anytime you want, if they want to ask questions and you want to answer them, fine. If you don't,
yeah, if I can. Other than Morgan, I'd like to answer people's questions.
Okay, we should we should take a moment just to say, which I didn't do properly to begin with. Two things. One, there's an aspect of this channel that is not working quite properly, so everyone is going to be where they're at. I can't move them around. Unfortunately, I can't hide Bill really easily, so
I got you This morning,
Yeah.
screaming
but
about StreamYard all day.
This is the first of what will be a 4-part series on Islam, a Christian perspective. This is part 1. Bill Honsberger is leading it. And he's kind of dealing with the history. Where did they come from? And why are they here? Carry on smartly. They'll interrupt you with questions if they have them.
So much. Okay, well, again, I'm going to approach this, at least to start. The missionary aspect is really the second part of our presentations on how do we talk to Muslims. The first part is trying to understand what it is they believe, and that's very hard to define in some cases. How does it work? How is it understood? How has it been understood over time? How has it changed? All sorts of things like this. Again, I'm going to give you the official version, and I'm going to give you some less than official versions, but still all sourced in Muslim sources and Arabic sources itself. It's not something that Christians are throwing rocks at. I demand that my students in class, when they're doing a report on Islam, they talk about the Quran and the Hadith. If they're doing talk on Buddhism, they're reading the sutras. If they're doing Hinduism, they're reading the Bhagavad Gita. I always want to use primary sources, and I don't use Jewish sources on Islam or Christian sources on Judaism or Hindu sources on anybody else. I want them to read these sources themselves, so you see what they say about themselves, how they say it, what their texts say, and things like this. I also have the attitude that the closer to the original source we have is the better source. I don't care what some Shia priest, the mullah says 1,400 years after the fact, as opposed to what, say, Mohammed said, at least allegedly said in the Quran, or what the early hadith say, what the Christ says, or some other hadith. I want to go back as close to the original. I don't care what some modern American Buddhist says. I want to go back to what the Buddha said, or at least as close as we can get to him. So I'm always doing that with all the different religions I talk to. So with Islam, we have a lot of sources. Now that's a big fight lately, and I'll get into that maybe later on. So let's just give a brief history of Islam, somewhat taking their point of view, but I'm going to go with basically a historical view, what most historians have done with this. So in 570 AD, Muhammad is born. He's orphaned at an early age. He goes to live with his aunt, who's has a successful business. She's got money. And so he's raised in this family. Now, again, if you listen to the official version, Muhammad was just a good businessman. After 9/11, there was all these talking heads on Bill Maher's show and others, talking about, that's just like working for Sun Systems or Microsoft or something like this. Well, no, that's not what they meant by a successful businessman. If you look at what's called the Middle East, and you look at where, if you take the official story, where Mecca and Medina are, there's all these huge empires all around the world, from India, China, through the the Greek ones, the Roman ones. There's just huge empires going all over the place. The Egyptian, the Assyrians. And so to travel to the trade routes that would go across the Middle East, it was very important to know where water was. It was very important to know where shelter is when you'd have these giant caravans coming across. And so what happened was so often with Muhammad's tribe, for example, the Quraysh tribe, and many other tribes there around Mecca and stuff like this, they would hire out as guides for these caravans. And if you put in a contract offer and the caravan hired you, then it was your job for the men of the tribe to go along with the caravan itself and protect it. Why did they need to protect it? Because all the tribes that did not get the contract offer, it was their job to raid the caravan, steal everything in sight. So this had been going on for who knows how long. If you're a successful leader of your tribe, your job is to provide for your people. And if I am a raider and I provide for my people, then I'm not a bad person. I'm providing for my people. And that's how they saw each other. So what we know about is that Muhammad was a successful businessman. What did that mean? He was a successful fighter. He was a successful raider. He was successful in protecting, at least mostly successful. We'll get to more of that later. So that's what's going on with this business stuff. So it's happening across Mecca. Now, again, there's arguments about where Mecca, what is, Mecca, is it really up in Petra? There's all this stuff going on now. I'm not really touching that. But just to assume the story as they give it, Muhammad's a member of the Quraysh tribe. The Quraysh tribe is all basically pagan, like most people around the world. The Kaaba, that black rectangular building in Mecca today, depending on whether Adam built it or did Abraham build it or Moses built it, who knows? That's all the different claims that you'll hear, different claims from different Muslims. But inside that Kaaba was hundreds of different idols, pagan idols to different gods, the sun gods, the moon gods, the star gods, the fly gods, just like you see everywhere else in the world. This is an important part of the story that this is going on. So when Muhammad starts to hear his messages early on, the early version of the messages are going to focus on two things, very important to Muslims. One is there's only one God. All right, this is very critical to Islamic thought. There is only one God, period, end of discussion. Now, he's hearing that message, and when he's going to go out and preach in the marketplace, the Jews and Christians are going to go, yeah, only one God, very good, as opposed to the pagans with millions and gazillions of gods. The second thing that's also very important for Muslims is that Judgment Day is coming. And Judgment Day is very serious. As a Christian, you can watch Left Behind movies 1,000 times a day, and you will never be as serious about Judgment Day as the typical Muslim is. Worrying about your place in the afterlife is monstrously huge. It dominates the thought process, and we'll see how that works out later. Okay, so this is the early message that Muhammad is hearing, according to him, from Gabriel. And he goes into the marketplace and preaches this message. And pretty much the Jews and Christians are like, yeah, again, we like this guy. As the story starts to flesh out, more and more people are hearing this, but a lot of them not hearing it well. They don't like it because Muhammad is starting to make all sorts of statements about how he's the final seal of the prophets. He's the Rasul, the apostle. He's all these important things. And the Jews and Christians, well, we liked you early, but we're not buying necessarily. You're the last prophet. You're the final prophet. You're the final authority from God. And we have to absolutely, go with your stuff. So there's a bifurcation, a split happening amongst his audience, and that becomes important later too. So as he's giving this message,
here's my on that, just to help flesh this out. Is that why the early Muhammad writings are friendly to Jews and Christians?
Yes.
And later writings are not?
Yeah, and again, I've had conversations with Muslims who admit that. And I've had conversations with Muslims who just there's no difference between Mecca and Medina periods. Well, most scholars said there really is a difference. And again, this is the Quran is not ordered chronologically, not even close. It's ordered large and small. It's ordered by the dimension of the thing as opposed to the chronology. So you have to get Muslim commentary about what's happening at this time when this surah is given, and what the events are that's surrounding it and all this kind of stuff. It always demands context. So in this respect, it is splitting. The early period when Muhammad's preaching early on, he's got a friendly audience. But like I said, as his message is filling out with more and more about the man, me, I'm it. The more Jews and Christians are saying, no, we're not buying this. Then again, you can find this in all their sources. Some terrible things happen. Okay, so the Muslim community is small, maybe only 30 people. Abu Bakr and some of the early, going to be caliph someday, and all these different important people. But what goes on now is that there's some critics, and the best way I can describe this is I always thought of Fozzie Bear when he got like the Muppets days for some of us older people. But when Fozzie Bear would be doing his comedy routine, there's always be these two old guys up in the thing, and they would be criticizing him all the time, always picking fun of Fozzie Bear. Well, what was happening with Muhammad as preaching in the marketplace, this is again in their sources, there's this old Jewish guy. From some accounts, he was like over 100 years old, which at a time when the average lifespan is maybe 45 years, this is incredible, right? So he's up there and he's hearing Muhammad's preach, and he's not buying it, and he's making fun of him. And all this kind of stuff. So as the story goes, a prayer meeting was held with the early community of Muslims. And Muhammad said some very important words. Rescue me from this attacker of Islam. Now notice this is just an old guy making fun of Muhammad's preaching. So a guy volunteers and goes and guts him, goes and kills the older Jewish fellow. Part of the story is a Jewish poet, a woman, pregnant woman, heard about this terrible event, and she wrote a critical poem ripping into Muhammad and the early Muslim community. Another prayer meeting was held. Who will rescue me from this new attacker of Islam? And somebody volunteered, went and killed her. Now, the reason I bring up, Morgan.
That was actually one of the things that I noticed while I think it was reading either Surah 2 or Surah 3. Was basically, it was like violence is only allowed if, like, you know, an aggressor is coming after you or like you're being persecuted or whatever. And I'm hearing this and I'm just like, oh, define aggressor for me, please. Because this reminds me of the alphabet mafia saying, I'm being persecuted when someone uses their actual pronouns.
Well, yeah, I've said this for decades now, and talking to Muslims and Mormons both, that here's two very large religions, and they always play the victim card. Every Muslim I've had serious talks with for years will say that we were, you know, it's self-defense. We would only attack in self-defense. We've been attacked. And, you know, they're one of the largest religions in the world, the second largest maybe, and they're by far the most aggressive religion in the history of the world. You hear from me. I was just at the atheist convention a few weeks ago, and I talked to Don's podcast this morning about atheism. But atheists used to throw out this line that, you know, more people have been killed in the name of God than anything else, blah, blah, blah. Well, some historians and some actual scholars of war put together an encyclopedia of war about 25, 30 years ago, at which point they deemed that 93% of all wars in recorded history had nothing to do with religion at all. It was all, we want your stuff. Then Islam had 4%, which is a lot of wars, but still, it's not the big thing. And then all the rest of the religions, Christianity, Judaism, everybody else, Hindu, Buddhist stuff, is 3%. But Islam still has a large section. But they've always been victims, Morgan, to go back to your point. And you know, again, what is aggression? Well, merely speaking against Islam was considered aggressive enough that you would be killed for it. And you have blasphemy laws in all sorts of different, you know, Muslim states in the world. There's 57 of them that I know of. And you can get killed real fast, you know, saying something critical. From people I know over there, you can be an atheist as an Arab, you know, living in, you know, Saudi Arabia or Tehran or whatever. You can be an atheist, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. But boy, if you come out and criticize Mohammed, that can get you killed. It's, you know, it's a very sensitive issue to this day. Like I said, blasphemy laws all over the world. Okay, so this is happening now. Why is that important? Because in 622, which is the Hijra, the flight, this is when Muhammad is forced to flee Mecca again. Muslim sources will say, oh, you know, he was under tremendous persecution from the Quraysh people and his own people. Tremendous persecution, so he's forced to flee. Not remembering that part of the problem why they were forced to flee is they were being deemed so violent with like these murders that I just described. So they run up the road to Medina in 622. Muslims, this is a very important year, the year of the flight. The Muslim calendar starts on this year. So it's very important to them. And again, he's seen as a victim. He's running up to Medina. Now, what's going on with Medina is interesting. Medina's all sorts of weird stuff about Medina, but what it is the rival to the Quraysh, to the Mecca community. And there's tribes around Medina, including Jewish tribes and all this sort of stuff. And when Muhammad comes up there with this tiny little group of followers, what happens is that the Medina people say, this guy's a serious warrior. He's a successful businessman, as it were. We have fought against him. He's given us so much trouble. Let's make him the leader of our army and basically leader of the government. So a lot of what happens, it's called Sharia, S-H-A-R-I-A or I-A-H. Sharia law starts to become something really important in reference, and it's really starting to really take root here in Medina with the governmental things. For most Muslims, they don't understand America. Most Muslims think America is a Christian nation, period. We're just Christians. So whatever horrible thing is done, strip joints to, you know, all sorts of awful things all over the country, that's Christian, because America is a Christian country, because in their cultures, how they've been raised, they're all Muslim. Everything is Muslim. Islam is not about a religion. Islam is life. Islam is the government. Islam is how you do marriage and how you do every single thing in your life. It's depending on how strong the is. Everything is defined by that. So in that respect, when they think of Christianity or Judaism, they think, oh, the Jews are all religious Jews, which of course they're not. And Christians are in charge of America, which of course they're not. But then it's hard for them to understand because their own context helps them see that in a certain way, and it's not necessarily in reality. So 622 is the year of the flight, important date. Then we get to 630. Now, what's going to happen between 622 when Muhammad goes up and gets given the governmental, head in Medina, as there's a big war now between Medina and Mecca, between the tribes that are now allied with Muhammad as the head and basically the corporation, some of its accompanying tribes as well. And this man of peace, Gandhi, depending on who you listen to here in the United States, is involved. He either orders or personally commands over 82 battles, most of them brief, most of them small, but 82 battles in those 8 years. So this is a very violent thing going on. Another important date that's not on your calendar right here, I don't know why I didn't type it in there, but it marks Islam dramatically. So some of us were born in Texas, unlike some carpetbaggers who came down from the north. But
I was born in Texas.
You were?
Yes, sir. Laredo.
Oh, well, okay. I apologize. You're one of God's chosen. I'll leave it.
I am.
So when I was a little kid, the few years I got to live in Texas, we learned about the Alamo. And a lot of Texas people identify themselves as, this is symbolic of what it means to be a Texan, to be independent, not to have some foreign government, Santa Ana,
right,
Washington running us and stuff like this. That's how they thought. So the Battle of Badir, 624, okay, very important date. I'll tell you how relevant 624 is, Battle of Badir. This is not Gettysburg. This is not the Battle of the Somme in World War I. This is not, Napoleon at Waterloo. This is a battle where there's maybe according to the story, there may be 1,000 people from Mecca and maybe 300 or so from Medina. So they're grossly outnumbered. But the group from Medina wins the fight. Maybe 50 people are killed. It's not a big thing. But the fact that there was such a disparity in the armies tells the Muslim how they think about this, that with Allah's help, we can defeat even the Soviet Union or something like that, or even the United States. And let me give you an example. When bin Laden, after 9/11, so several weeks after 9/11 happened, CNN or somebody got a camera, video footage of bin Laden with Zawahiri and some of his top lieutenants in some party, some event somewhere. And Zawahiri goes up to bin Laden. He's like, "Oh, great Sheikh, it's so amazing." I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but "Oh, great Sheikh, it's so amazing. We can't keep Qurans. Everybody in the world wants a Quran. We're just sending them out everywhere. It's so amazing. It's just like the Battle of Badir." And I remember sitting there thinking, I wonder how many in the audience know what that is and the significance, how important that is to the modern Muslim mind, just like it was important in 624. It convinced Muslims that they can win any fight as long as they have Allah's help. Okay. Which is contradictory to some other things we'll talk about later. Okay. But so this is a huge event. They defeat the army. All right. So 630 comes along and basically Medina wins. And according to every history book of religion, I have a ton of world religions books. I've given most of them away. I forgot to donate most of them. But according to every book I would look at, there was a new world religious text coming out in the academic world. They all said something like this. Muhammad went in and cleansed the Kaaba. And I'm thinking, well, that's interesting language, isn't it? What do they, hose it down or something like this? No. Remember what's in there. There's all these idols with all these idol worshipers and, priests and attendants and, priest wannabes or whatever you want to call them in the different, pagan religions that were there. And they slaughtered every one of them. They just slaughtered. They estimate hundreds and hundreds of people were killed inside the Kaaba itself. Plus, there was a list of people, of some of Muhammad's old enemies, including some of his own family members there in Mecca, the list of 10 that they wanted killed as well. So anyhow, that's what happened. But none of the modern textbooks for American world religions will ever say this. All they say is he cleansed the Kaaba. All right. So we're getting a lot of dawah, which is Muslim evangelism with a little twist of taqiyya, which is Muslim evangelism, which includes lying through your teeth to the non-believer. It's okay. Allah blesses lying to your teeth. Muhammad was great at taqiyya, and even Allah himself commits taqiyya, will deceive the non-believer. Okay. So in this case, this is what's happened in the West, is that people have been told about this peaceful guy who just came in and, cleaned out these idol worshippers, but didn't hurt anybody or anything like that, and set up this religion of peace. So if you guys remember, many of you are old enough to remember, after 9/11 happened, President Bush was up standing on the ruins of the Trade Center, and he made several different interesting statements. One of them, he says, this is a religion of peace that has been hijacked. Why the word Islam even means peace. And as soon as I heard that, I'm like, I know he's got scholars who know a lot more about Islam than I do, and it takes all of a minute to search that out in any Muslim dictionary of any sort. The word for peace in Islam is salam, which is not Islam. Islam means submission, in particular, submission to the will of Allah.
Mm-hmm.
Very different words with whole different meanings completely. It's like saying geography is the same as, historiographics. I'm sorry, you can use the last several words or several syllables are the same, but it's not the same word. It doesn't cover the same concept at all.
My Quran's introduction actually told that lie that Islam means peace, and I was like, no, it doesn't. Shut up, you're lying.
Mm.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's what's being told in the West, and what's being told in the West is not necessarily the same at all as what's being told. So let me go through the dates here. So 632 now is the next date I have in the outline. So Muhammad is now 62. They've taken the city. Everything's wonderful. He's set up as the great prophet. He's got, most of the army. Well, several things happen. But the biggest thing that happened is that, I'm going to get into the slaughter of the Jews, the Khaybar tribe and all this kind of fun stuff. But one of the big things that happens is that Muhammad dies. Now, why is that important? In the Muslim world, he is the perfect man. He always followed Allah's will. Even though the Quran itself has several examples of where Muhammad says, ask God to forgive him for his sins, I haven't met a Muslim yet that'll say that Muhammad sinned. I'm like, it's right here in your text. And they're like, no, I don't see that. He's the perfect man. He's Allah's perfect man. He's a man's man. He's a warrior above warriors. Has sex better than anybody. I mean, that's just their language. He's a man's man in every possible sense of the world. He's not supposed to die writhing in pain on his bed. And why did he die? Because a Jewish woman poisoned him. So when I explained this to class, I said, understand something, you're hearing something that's never going to be admitted in the Western world. He slaughtered a Jewish tribe. According to the accounts, they were supposedly, he didn't get as much support from them for one of his battles that he wanted. So he deemed them as traitors. And the numbers go from anywhere from 600 to 900 men. Every boy that had reached puberty already was eligible, and they basically beheaded them all. And as their own accounts say, Muhammad took so many heads that after a while he could not lift the sword anymore to take off another Jew's head. And so then the other guys got to come in and have the fun killing the Jews. So he did the same mistake that Attila did. You never take a captured slave when you've wiped out their village and put them in your kitchen. So if you want to take over the world, Morgan, don't put captured slaves in your kitchen.
Exactly.
We've taught her that since she was a child.
There you go.
Well, you can see that in her sometimes.
Yes.
Plotting all the time. Okay, so a Jewish woman whose husband and son were killed in the slaughter of the Jews poisoned him. And it's a horrible thing. He lasted for days. It was a very painful death. Of course, they slaughtered her in response. But all sorts of things happened, really important things. One is he asked for something to write on because he wanted, in essence, to write a will. Now, this is interesting because the way that Muhammad's story is sold to the West is that he was an illiterate guy. He couldn't write the Quran. It must be written by Allah because Muhammad was illiterate. He didn't know how to write. Well, then why is he asking for writing materials? That's kind of fun there. But the biggest thing that's going to happen now is the concept of the caliph. And caliph in Arabic means successor. So it's C-A-L-I-P-H. And the successor to Islam is what's going to set in motion this fight between the Sunnah and Shia. It's a monstrous split that has gotten, so many hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Muslims killed all the time. Over the last several decades of my life, you'll hear about, in Pakistan, a mosque getting blown up. And something in the immediate report, well, the Jews did it or the CIA did it. And almost always, it's either the Sunni or the Shia blowing each other up. Or in Pakistan, you also have, some different versions of Islam. You have different kinds. There's so many different versions, but nevertheless, these groups have been attacking each other. And the larger issue: who is the caliph? The prophet has died. Who will follow him? Now, in the 1830s and 40s in Pakistan, in the 1830s and 40s in Iran, you have different characters coming up to claim that no, they're the final prophet, which will get you killed in all sorts of parts of the Muslim world. But for the original time, the question would be, who would be the caliph. The split comes down to this in 632. The larger Arabic tradition had been, we choose our best man. When the council, the elders of the different tribes get all together as a group, like if they want to try to have a fight with somebody or whatever, they would choose, who do we think is the best man? Who's the best scholar? Who's the best fighter? Who's the best voice to represent us? They're gathering all these factors, and that's typical in the Arab tradition. The other group comes to the belief that, no, what we need is a blood relative of the prophet himself, and it must have his blood. Okay, that's who should be the next caliph. And so for the first, they're called the four rightly guided caliphs. So the first three of them are basically in the tradition of who's our best man. Abu Bakr was Muhammad's one of his first converts, the father of the favorite daughter, Aisha, which we will talk a lot more about later. Had been with him for all the time now, and Abu Bakr is seen as the best man. And so what's become the sunnah or traditional side of things wins their first discussion about the caliph, and Abu Bakr is the first caliph. And then you get Umar and Uthman and all these different guys that come in. The first three are the rightly guided. What does that mean? That means they were doing what Muhammad wanted them to do because that's what Allah said to do. So rightly guided carries with it this notion that we are in the same tradition as the prophet. We are doing exactly Allah's will when we go out and start conquering people right and left. One of the first fights is the fight against the apostates. Some of the tribesmen who had gathered together with Muhammad in their conquering of Medina and stuff like this, when the prophet dies, they're like, okay, we're out. The prophet's dead. We're going to move on our own ways. And so one of the first fights that Abu Bakr has is going out and slapping these people around, getting them back into the fold. The fold being called the Ummah. The Ummah is the equivalent of the body of Christ for Christians in some important ways, different in others. But the Ummah is the Muslim world. It's the Muslim community. Okay. So everybody that's a Muslim who's submitted, we'll get to the theology, what all this means later, but everybody who's a Muslim is considered part of the Ummah. So these people were trying to leave the Ummah. You're back in. 638, they've gone up the road. I don't have that date on here either, but by 638, they've gone up the road and they've conquered the Holy Lands, which at the time were run by the Byzantines, which is the eastern half of the old Roman Empire, headquartered in Constantinople. They start spreading out all over the place. By 711, they've conquered all of North Africa, which at one time was at least allegedly Christian. I'm not big on the whole Roman Catholic, the emperor signs a pin and everybody's a Christian type of thing. But by 711, they've conquered all the way through North Africa up through Spain. And in 732, they're stopped at the Battle of Tours or Poitiers, depending on which book you read, halfway across France by Charles Martel, the Hammer. The full title is The Hammer of Muslims. Martel stops them. He's the father or grandfather of Charlemagne. I can't remember right now. My brain's going sideways. Sorry. But Charlemagne becoming, the first really Holy Roman Emperor type stuff in 800 AD. Okay, Martel stops them. And one of the things that happens is like everywhere else in the world, in Spain, you had all these little Catholic city kingdoms type stuff, fiefdoms, whatever you want to call them, who are terribly, they're all allegedly Catholic. So they're all supposedly together, but they're not. They're all in rivalry with each other. They all fall one by one. The Muslims are just picking them off. By the time the French figure this out, the Franks, they're like, if we don't band together, we're going to look like Spain. We're going to be under Muslim rule. So they actually banded together to stop the Muslims halfway across. I have one Muslim apologist who wrote several books, Pakistani gentleman named Abdul Wahid Khan, in my office for years. And we talked about all this, and he was claiming that, of course, the Muslims were defending themselves as they rolled through North Africa, Spain, and France. I said, so you're telling me the French people were saying, please come in and take us over, like, and the Spanish do this, and all these other groups. Nobody does this, but that's the point. That's the idea, is that it's all in self-defense. Okay, now, so 732 is the end of the Muslim attack into this part of Europe, the western part of Europe, but that doesn't stop the Muslim attack against Europe. Muhammad famously prophesied that sometime Muslims will take over not only Constantinople, the eastern half of the empire, but of the city of Rome itself, the western half of the empire, which was split in half by the time he was, Constantine's son took over the eastern half. That's a whole other silly story, but empire split, and Muhammad says, Muslims will take over and rule over both, which brings us to some really important ideas. about this conquest idea. There is what's called the House of Islam, the Dar al-Islam, which is compared to the Dar al-Haram.
Mhm.
It's wrong. Dar al, I'm sorry.
I think you were.
It'll hit me at 2 a.m. What
You need
happens
some coffee.
when you get old? Yeah, I need coffee. I need something. Old age is on me. But there's the two houses, the House of the Sword and the House of Islam. Everywhere Muslims rule is the House of Islam. Everywhere Muslims are not in control is the Dar al-Harb. That's the word, Dar al-Harb, H-A-R-B in English. It's House of the Sword. And jihad, or holy war, whatever you want to call it, is practicable in the Dar al-Harb, the House of the Sword, to bring them into the Dar al-Islam, the world of Islam, the House of Islam. And so, for example, by contrary thought here, when Israel becomes independent in 1948, that's a terrible thing in the Muslim world. It had been part of the Dar al-Islam since 638, since I remember it was Uthman or whoever took it over. And for it to come out of rule and be ruled by Jews, especially Jews, is the most terrible thing, a horrible thing. And that you can't understand Hamas, you can't understand Hezbollah, you can't understand all these groups around the Muslim world, even places where there are no Jews, this hatred. And that's why I bring up the story about the Jewish mom who killed him. Okay, so that brings us up to all sorts of important things. Again, there's huge Muslim empires. Sometimes they're Shia, sometimes they're Sunni. And this is going to go on. I can't recite all the history here because we don't have the time for this, but huge Muslim empires are going to rise up. And by the time, let's say in modern, what's called modernist history, philosophy and history, by basically the 1500s up, the Ottomans take over the Muslim world. They're Sunni. And what's going to happen is that they are going to fulfill one of Muhammad's prophecies, which is to take over Constantinople and make it Istanbul. And that happens in 1453. Why is this important? Well, there have been hundreds of years of attacks across, trying to take over Constantinople, and it wasn't working. Constantinople is, again, the city, the largest and most beautiful church in the world. St. Sophia is there, and all this kind of fun stuff. And you have to get a little bad Christian history. So when the Crusades are going to start in 1095 is the call for the First Crusade. 1096, the First Crusade goes down because the Muslims have been, the Sunni Muslims who were Arab had been running Jerusalem like they had since 638, and there were Christian pilgrimages. Constantine's mom started Christian pilgrimages in the 300s, and so Christians from all over Europe were spending lots of money going down and spending lots of money, in Jerusalem and the surrounding area. And the Arabs were like, great, we're making money. This is an awesome deal. But a group called the Seljuk Turks are going to take over that part of the world. And they're old school. They're like, we're doing it like Mohammed. You think of them as ISIS for their day, okay? And so let's capture these pilgrimages coming down. We'll, kill off who we need to kill off, hold the rich people for ransom, and steal everything they got. And this had been going on for several years before the First Crusade is actually called for. This is not to mention attacks against Vienna and other places, Rome itself, that had been, Muslims that attacked Europe. So before the First Crusade, there's at least 300 years of Muslim attacks against Europe. Why that's important now is that in Constantinople, as they're still the largest Christian city in the world, they get in trouble. The Muslims keep attacking, and the Muslims seem to have an endless supply of troops willing to die for, in jihad. And so the city's in trouble. So what happens is that the emperor asks the West, and remember, the Eastern and Western empires, they don't say remember, because that maybe you don't know. 1054, it's called the Great Schism, which is where we get the Orthodox churches versus the Catholic churches to this day. And both sides anathematize each other, which means they both declare the other side is outside of the kingdom. Yes, that's true. So the Orthodox think the Catholics aren't Christians, real Christians, and the Catholics think the Orthodox. Why is that important? Well, here's the Orthodox asking for help. And the Fourth Crusade sets out, at least allegedly, to help the other kind of Christians fight off the Muslim attack. And so they're welcomed into the city. This is in the 1200s. They're welcome into the city because these are our allies. These are our buddies. And once the army gets into the city, they're like, hey, We don't have to fight against the infidel over there, the Muslims. We've got infidel right here in Constantinople, and they sack the city, and they steal everything inside, kill hundreds of thousands of people, and the city starts its decline. They estimate that by the time the Muslims take over the city 200 years later in 1453, that there's maybe only 20,000 people left inside the city itself, one of the great ancient cities. There's other fun, terrible, stupid stories about how Muslims took the city finally, but they take it in 1453, and it's Istanbul to this day, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's really important. Ottoman Empire rules until, I have put the date here, 1917. At the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire had allied itself with Austria-Hungary and Germany during World War I. And guess what? They lost. Now, historians had already called the Ottoman Empire the sick man of Europe. It's part of NATO now, which is really interesting because of the history here, but they had been shrinking and shrinking, just like the Spanish Empire had been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. Why? Because you can only survive so long stealing other people's stuff, which is both what the Ottomans did and what the Spanish did. And eventually, if you're not becoming industrial, which is what the Dutch and the English were doing, is becoming more industrial, you're going to start shrinking. You can't pay off your mercenary armies or anybody else if you don't have the resources. So the Ottoman Empire is shrinking. They're basically, roughly Turkey today, okay, it keeps shrinking. And by the time they lose World War I, they shrink dramatically. Several things happen. Here's the Caliph and the Caliphate, the kingdom, as it were. The king of this kingdom, or Caliph and the Caliphate. The Caliphate is small now. It's in trouble. And the new leader in Turkey is a guy named Ataturk, who's an atheist and a Marxist. And he renounces the Caliphate. This is so critical. You can't understand the Muslim Brotherhood, which means you can't understand ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all the rest, without understanding what happens here. They renounce it. There is no Caliph here in Istanbul anymore. This sends a shockwave through the Muslim world. We may not like the Turks, but we got a Caliph.
Right.
The Arabs and the Turks don't get along for nothing, but we have a Caliph. We know who's in charge. We know if Allah calls for a war, the Caliph is in place. And boom, he's not anymore. Now the current Erdogan, the current president of Turkey, is starting to sound more religious the last several years. But they've been an atheist government, at least that's what they claimed for the longest time, even though that's not maybe the population. So when that happens at the end of World War I, it does send a shockwave through. And in 1924 here, you get the beginning of what's called the Muslim Brotherhood. By 1928, it becomes formal. Again, this is kind of like the parent organization for Hamas, for Al-Qaeda, for ISIS. And there's a story that connects here to Colorado, where I live, where the head of Muslim Brotherhood comes here to Colorado in 1947 or something like this, 46, somewhere in there. And he comes to Greeley, Colorado, this cow town up the road from Denver here, where there's the University of Northern Colorado now, UNC. I think at the time it was Greeley State University or something like this. And he goes to a dance. And this is really important to understand. Now, you can imagine what the women were dressed like at a dance in 1946 or 47. The dresses are almost to the ground. There's bobby socks. They're doing swing dancing and all this kind of stuff. And he is totally outraged. Look at how terrible this Christian country is and how they make their women dress, how immoral they look. One could only imagine if he had come to a dance 80 years later. See the dances, for the last 40 or 50 years, Two Live Crew or some of these guys, obscene beyond belief. I would agree with him that this is obscene what's happening with his women. But at this point, he sees this and he comes back with this mindset that we have to rescue American women. These Christians are treating women so badly, and we will help by taking over America, bringing Sharia law in, which, according to them, is a blessing to women, protects women from the evils of the pagan world or the Christian world or something like this.
Keep your Sharia law. I don't want it.
Okay, so another important date that sets everything aligned is obviously 1948 when Israel becomes a nation. It is also when Pakistan and India do their bloody split. India is maybe, I think they say it's the largest nation in the world right now population-wise, but probably 150, 160 million of these people are not Hindus, they're Muslims. And so there's been since the Muslims invaded there, there's not much, I know much more about Western history because there's a lot more written. What happens when the Muslim empire starts to spread towards India, goes through the stands and everything into India proper, It's not written down. Some of the people estimate millions of people died on both sides. But today in India, with the current prime minister of India, there have been Muslims getting killed, Hindus getting killed. Huge thing just happened with the Indian Supreme Court and the Muslim mosque, which was destroyed because they say it was built on top of a Hindu temple to Ram. You know, these fights don't go away because we wish them away. And if you follow the news at all, in just the last month, this constant wars between India and Pakistan, which started basically in 1948, especially over Kashmir, have erupted again. And there's 6 major wars, several smaller ones, you know, skirmishes, they say, but people are getting killed on the border there. Anyways, this has been all over the news just in the last couple of months, what's happened over there. Anyhow, Sam Huntington, one of the top scholars in the world on Islam, he was teaching at Harvard at the time, came out with this interesting statement. He says, Islam has bloody borders, and boy, was he hated for that. But it's true. Anywhere the Muslim world is next to a non-Muslim country, there's always been war, always. It's hard to find an example where they've, you know, and for Americans, we have pretty benign neighbors, so we don't understand this at all. We got Mexico and Canada, you know, we don't find, everybody else is far away, you know. I mean, Japan and Germany, you know, all that kind of fun stuff, but we don't live next to a Muslim country, so we don't have the same kind of pressures. Although what's happening in Europe, right, you know, for the last 50 years, the Islamification of Europe is going on, and that's not going to be pretty. Okay, so 1948, so Pakistan and India split. That's one big thing in the Muslim world, but also Israel becomes a country again for the first time. It's basically 135, and when the Romans stomped the rest of the Jewish, you know, uprisings out in the Bar Kokhba revolt. And that's it. That's when the Wailing Wall is down for the last time. Jews don't have, when they took it again in 1967, it's the first time they'd had it since 135. So that's a huge thing in the Jewish world. Don knows this. I grew up in a very secular Jewish neighborhood in Los Angeles. And I'm in 6th grade, and when we're listening at the end of school, right at the end of beginning of June there, they're just listening to the BBC because there's so many Jewish kids in my class. All of them non-observant. Nobody wore a kippah. Nobody acted religious at all. But when the BBC came out and announced that the IDF had taken over the wall, my class erupted. People are screaming, this is in LA. This is not, you know, Tel Aviv. They're hugging each other and laughing and crying and screaming. It was just, I'm like, what the heck is this? I have no idea. I'm the boy in the class. I have no idea what is so important about this place. Why are they so excited? I don't know how to explain that to me. But this sends a shockwave, another shockwave through the Muslim world. Muslims believe that Jerusalem is the 3rd mosque. The site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque was actually the 3rd mosque, although it wasn't built in Muhammad's lifetime. They claim that he, in a dream, went there, and so they claim it as their 3rd city beside Mecca and Medina. And so this gets dicey. You can't go over there without understanding some bits of the world. And I'm not saying I know everything, but some understanding we have here. This is theirs. And if you listen to Muslim scholars, as soon as, or not even scholars, just preachers, as soon as we've got Israel back under Muslim control, which is Hamas's, you know, Hamas doesn't care about land, by the way. They're much more, you know, driven by, let's kill every Jew. That's what their charter says. But once Islam is ruling again and is part of the Dar al-Islam, then we go back to Spain, which had also been part of the Dar al-Islam since, well, 700 years roughly, until 1492. You know, Americans, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And then Isabella kicked all the Jews out of Spain. The Spanish Inquisition's taking off in a terrible, terrible way. And Muslims are now all completely out of Spain, out of Europe at that point. And so the Spanish call it Reconquista. We reconquered our land, got rid of 700 years of Muslim rule. And oh, by the way, let's go around the world and start, you know, killing people all over the place. So we have the, you know, conquistadors in Mexico, way up in Kansas, interesting enough. They're in Guam, in the Philippines, where I've been many times. So anyway, it's a very type of militant Catholicism that comes out of Spain because they've been fighting for their world for all these years. So anyhow, when Israel comes out, then what Muslims call Andalusia, which is the Muslim name for Spain, that's the next target. And there was a train bombing a few years ago in one of the suburbs. And basically the Muslim leaders said, well, get ready, guys. It says, after we've got Israel, we're coming back for you. And they openly say this. So I'm not throwing rocks at them. This is their stated goal. And again, remember that in their minds, this is good. This is righteous. This is Allah's will. And whatever is Allah's will, we need to be in submission to it. Right. So anyways, that's a brief history. And I'm talking about incredibly brief. There's so many more things there. Any sort of questions or comments you want to make at this point?
I was going to say that, yeah, you're right about that. They once they've conquered something, it belongs to them, and it's not easily given up. The fact that what you're talking about Spain is very true. They will go back, and if they don't have you in their empire, they will try to regain you back. Also, I think whenever there's a Muslim community anywhere, like let's say, for example, here in the U.S., I think or whatever they build a mosque in the community, they consider it's a 5-mile radius, I believe. I think it's a 5-mile radius. They claim that area for Islam. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but
well, it all depends on who you talk to, James. There's so many gazillions of differences.
I know, but I think it's just more modern.
Yeah, Roman Catholics will commonly say today, Catholic apologists, oh, Rome teaches this. We have this one, not like you Protestants with thousands and thousands of denominations.
Right.
We're one big happy family. Well, that's a crock. Anybody who's been around Catholics for 5 minutes knows better than that. There's so many factions and groups. Islam is the same way. There has not been a caliph since the Turks gave it up in 1718 in there. And there's been many people who claim to be the caliph,
right?
Who claim to be a successor. Al-Baghdadi, the ISIS guy, claimed it.
Yeah.
And he gets nailed. In my lifetime, Nasser in Egypt claimed to be the caliph. There's always somebody rising up saying they're caliph. A lot of people consider bin Laden as the caliph.
And you know what? And it's interesting that you compared to Roman Catholicism, because you have the same thing in the history of Roman Catholicism, where you have 2 or 3 popes and anti-popes at the same time.
Right.
Oh yeah,
Claiming to be the true pope.
The Babylonian captivity, yes. Who's to say, right? And if you go right now to France, you have Mel Gibson's family as a part of a split-off group.
Yeah.
So this one big happy family is nonsense, and it's
something slightly off the history, which is important, is a different kind of question, because as you pointed out, we have a lot of Muslims in this country and in other countries, Western countries as well, but it seems to me that percentage-wise, about 20%, from what I understand, are radical jihadist type of Islam. 80% are not. However, the 80% are sort of bullied by the 20%.
Okay, so when I was teaching at the one of the colleges I was teaching at, teaching world religions, I got a stern talking to from the dean of the school, how I have to say when I talk about Islam and bring up this history that only 10%.
Oh.
And my response to that was the same one I'll give you, Don. Good luck quantifying that. Good luck actually finding real numbers that talk that way.
Yeah.
But my point was then there was 1.6 billion Muslims was what the World Book of Religion said, or something like that, World Encyclopedia. I said, so what you're saying is it's only 160 million Muslims who want to kill me.
Correct. That's what I wanted to get to. Right.
Population of Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany. Okay. This is much more serious than what they say.
Yeah.
So we can't quantify this number. There's no way to quantify them. I don't think Muslims themselves can quantify these numbers. If you line and listen to the sermons, if you listen to how bin Laden used to talk, if you listen to Baghdadi and the ISIS, videos, it's always aimed at the 80%, to use your language, Tom, which, like I said, I don't buy, but just for the sake of this, it's always aimed at, hey, we're doing what Muhammad commanded us all to do. Just like a Christian might say, aren't we all supposed to follow Jesus?
Right.
Their version of it. We need to follow the will of the prophet, who is speaking directly to Allah and having Allah communicate to him his will, which is, we don't really know who Allah is other than his will. Talk about the nature of God as much in Islam. You talk about his will, what's been revealed, how he wants us to act. And so hey guys, come on, get on board. You're supposed to act like Muhammad called us all to act.
Right.
And so you read all sorts of frustrated, Muslim speakers talk about the fact that dang nabbit, we can't get everybody together to go off and fight in jihad anymore like we used to. Anyways, yeah, that's an interesting point. I don't know how to quantify that number, and I don't know anybody else who does either. And James, go back to your point. Yeah, that's how they see it that way. And
Yeah.
again, it's so frustrating because a lot is so. We'll get to the theology in a minute. He's so transcendent and so sovereign. And if you listen to the real serious scholars of Islam, again, there's a long histories of denominational splits called fiqh and other things, Salafi and Hanafi and all these things. Those serious things, Allah is so sovereign and so transcendent that we're basically just meat puppets. Everything that we do is Allah, the will of Allah. It was written in the book, and it's His will. And so, if that's the case, everything is happening. Then Israel becoming independent of Islamic rule, or Spain becoming, is also Allah's will. What the heck? How can that be Allah's will? And we know it's supposed to be Allah's will that those be inside. So it throws around some hard concepts for them to put together.
Yeah.
Don, I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
Well, I just was thinking about, we had a debate between a Muslim and I want to say David Smith or something. He might have been from
Smith?
Pardon?
Jay.
Yeah, Jay.
Jay Smith.
And he kept making the point during the debate that if jihad is declared, you will have to kill me, even though we're friends.
Yeah.
And he admitted that, yes, I would have to do that. So, I mean, they're pretty clear that that is what Allah has said, and we will have to follow that when the time comes, even if we are our friend.
Well, Abdul Wahid Khan, who's written several books attacking Paul, and he considers himself an apologist. When I met him, this is like 35 years ago, he was twice my age and literally half my size. And he told me, as my friend, we'd gone out to dinner and met many times, that he would have to kill me if the Imam said I'd gone too far in insulting Mohammed, which basically I do. But here's my friend telling me, and I said, "Well, this is the difference between us. Even if you want to be my enemy, my God tells me to love you and then to pray for you. Your God tells that I have to kill." He said, "You can't get any bigger difference than that, right there."
Right.
Right. Other questions and stuff before we get into the theology, just a hair. Again, this is all introductory material, so we're racing through things. Sorry.
You're forgiven.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if I'm forgiven by you or not, James.
Well, it's because I'm a Christian, not because
the one who forgives me is the one who matters.
Yeah. Well, you did good with the time frame there, Bill. I'm impressed.
How much time do you have, Don? That's you should never give me too much, but how much do I have?
Yeah. Well, I'm also thinking, and the reason for my earlier question about how is that the one you got from the Parliament, 93?
It is.
I have the same exact one.
Still one piece. I have a story to tell about how I got my Quran as well.
Yeah.
Oh, I got the small book.
And that's what I was going to right now, because we had the opportunity to talk with the leadership that was at the Parliament of World Religions in 1993. And, Joy asked the wife of the representative this interesting question, because imagine, if you will, an event that has witches and Wiccans on the dais leading worship and other things with Muslims and Christians and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
It was sort of wild. And, of course, we believe practicing witchcraft is wrong. And Muslims believe practicing witchcraft is wrong. And so Joy looked at her. They were sitting on the couch. She said, "Now, I know why I'm here, but why are you here? Do you really think that Islam is compatible with Wicca and witchcraft?" She said, "Oh, no. Then why are you here?" She goes, "We are hoping for peace, because the country I live in, our people are being killed by Hindus. I think it was Hindus. And so we're coming here trying to find a way to have peace for our families to live and coexist together." And she said, "And I moved to Naperville, Illinois. We didn't have a mosque or a place for the men to pray. And so I started opening my home every Friday for the men to come in and pray and lay out the carpets and so forth. And so I was going to go home and visit, and I was concerned who would open my house. And my neighbor, a Christian lady, she said, came over and knocked on the door and offered to set up my house every Friday for the men to come and pray. And when this opportunity came up, I thought, if we can do this in my little neighborhood with a Christian and a Muslim helping one another, why can't we do that on a world stage? So she was coming to try to find peaceful coexistence. So we know that there are some who were looking for a peaceful coexistence. But if the percentage is 10 or 20%, and you have a million Muslims, that's still 200 million. I mean, a billion Muslims, you have 200 million. That's still a lot of people that are not going to peacefully coexist.
John, at the parliament in Utah, I had a talk with a Muslim, a Sunni Muslim imam from India. And it was interesting talking, and we got on all this discussion about these kinds of things. And he said he actually taped me for his show, for his classes back home. It was fun. Got to share the gospel with a Muslim school in India, so fun stuff. Anyways, he and I are talking, and he says, well, we are different. We believe that all those examples of war that happened between Muhammad, and the unbelievers of his day, well, one-off situations, they are not to be repeated, which is completely the opposite example of almost all of Muslim tradition.
Right.
And I told him, I said, well, frankly, I wish yours was the dominant view in Islam. We'd have a much more peaceful world. But of course, it's not the dominant view. It's a tiny little minority
Right.
of the Muslim world that thinks that Muhammad's events aren't stuff for us to continue to do. So if you watch ISIS, ISIS would say, whatever Muhammad did, we need to do the exact same thing. And when they show in their videos them killing people in all sorts of horrible ways, setting people on fire, or there's a different perspective on that one, or cutting people's throats and stuff like this, they're sending those out as advertisements. Look, gang, we're doing it the way ISIS did, or excuse me, the way Muhammad did. We're kicking it old school here, We're doing OG stuff with Muhammad, like killing people in certain particular ways that the Quran and the Hadith, which we need to talk about here, in which they say. And that's, like I said, it's hitting a certain nerve in the Muslim community in the world. That's why people were joining ISIS from America and literally everywhere else in the world, because they were attracted to this idea. I want to do what Muhammad did. I want to act like Muhammad did. He's the perfect man again. And so, Muhammad had slaves, and he had sex slaves, and he had everything else. Well, then that makes it okay. The Muslim language is whatever your right hand possesses is the language they use. And we conquer these women. Well, my right hand possesses them, therefore I can use them as I will. Stuff. But do we have time to go into any more? Can we do the Quran and stuff?
No, we're slightly over time. I just want to mention two things. One is I will upload the outline into a file on our website, and I will create a link to it in the description panel. I'll do that tomorrow probably.
Okay.
And then next week we're going to pick up on what is it that we're doing here? Wherever we're leaving off now.
Starting with the Quran and Hadith, the theology.
Yeah, right, the theology. So next week we're going to look at the theology, the Quran, the Hadith, and so forth, which is very important to have a good handle on. There will also be a number of links in the outline, which again I'll get that posted tomorrow. So, and with that, everyone, it's been great. We'll be back 8:00 Central Time next Tuesday. Whatever time that is for you, that's what time it is for you. If the crew can hang around here for a minute, we're going to sign off and talk about some private stuff.
Sure.
Adios.